We have a bill on the concurrence calendar, so I'm going to go to the concurrence calendar now. Fourth substitute Senate Bill 16.
Fourth substitute Senate Bill 16, Transgender Medical Treatments and Procedures Amendments. Senator Kennedy.
Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Motion to concur with the House amendments for fourth substitute SB 16.
Thank you. We have a motion to concur. You want to explain the changes the House made?
The bill that we sent out from the Senate was a certain version. It went to the committee and then to the floor. The House had its way with this bill. President, I'll just say 105 people are interested in this bill in the Senate, the House, and the governor's office. And the House made a number of changes with what we sent over to them. One of them is an immediate effective date, which I know some of my colleagues on this floor were interested in as we had our earlier debates. The House decided to adopt that. They also changed the statute of limitations malpractice standard of action has been changed, and we've improved, I think, the consent that is required for a provider to individuals that are receiving transgender health care. And so those are the primary changes, and I'm open to the body for any questions they may have.
Thank you. Any comments or questions or discussion on motion to concur? Senator Plum.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I ask a question of the
Senator
sponsor?
Kennedy, will you yield?
Definitely.
Thank you. Go ahead, Senator Plum.
I wanted to ask about the immediate effective date, and knowing that this legislation will take effect before we're even out of session, and knowing the preparedness that families and patients and clinicians will be requiring, if you had thoughts on that, since that was something changed by your House sponsor.
Senator Kennedy, any thoughts on that?
Thank you, Mr. President. A night full of thoughts on that, and it's one of those things that we sent the bill in a certain version over to the House, and the House felt as a body, as a whole, that this was an important thing to move on. The reality behind the immediate effective date is the governor can sign it when they wish, and I haven't asked the governor when he intends to sign this bill, but that would be the time that these individuals and providers would have to respond to this, including the fact that, as the senator knows and this body knows, my intent behind the moratorium was that these people can continue unfettered within the practice that they've had possibly for years. These relationships, it is not my intent, nor is it this body or the legislature's intent, that their relationships be damaged. However, over time, the regulations that we're promulgating with this, the requirement will be that these providers live up to a certain standard of professionalism, and that the individuals receiving care will have to be consented in a way that may or may not have been happening with a variety of entities. But with all due respect to the University of Utah, which is, I think, the premier institution that's doing this, I think all of the regulations that we put into place actually likely mirror everything that's happening in a high-quality organization like that. There are others that will have to live up to other standards as a result of this, but with the moratorium is still in effect, just as it was when it left this body.
Thank you. A follow-up, Senator Plum?
No, thank you.
Senator Escamilla.
Thank you, Mr. President. A question to the sponsor.
Thank you. Go ahead. He's agreed to yield. Go ahead, Senator
Thank you.
Escamilla.
And my question is, and I think he did a brief explanation of some of those changes, but if you can just explain those changes in lines 660 to 670, and just because we heard him, I had an opportunity to be part of that committee, and I think he's been very clear of his intent to make sure we have enough evidence and have good guidelines of best practices as we move forward in this specific treatments. But if you can explain how these lines in 660 to 670 would not have an impact on sending a message that we don't want any providers to even work in this field when we're putting this very gigantic liability burden on medical providers.
Thank you for that question, Senator Escamilla. So, Senator Kennedy, any comments to that question?
Thank you, Mr. President. I also have a night full of thoughts and comments on that as well. And it was a proposal by one of the representatives who is an attorney who felt like the malpractice standard that we sent over to the House was insufficient to protect these individuals. And I'll point out to the body and the public, anybody that cares, all of our intent is not to harm but to help. And we, with great compassion, love, and desire to help, all of this is focused on the fact that we're trying to help children and families, even though I deeply respect that there are many that are not in agreement with that sentiment. Although I'll say from my heart and the heart of everybody I know here on the Hill, whether they agree with this bill or not, compassion and love are at the base of all of this. So to prove a malpractice case, as to the lines that the senator pointed out with this, that they would have to have received care after the effective date of this bill, that's one thing, and the consent would have to be turned away, that the individual on line 669, under the totality of the circumstances, a healthcare provider would have reason to believe that the minor or a similarly situated minor could later regret having given consent, which is part of the very interesting House debate that we had, was the whims and the changes that can happen to youth. There are those that would argue that youth, when they make these decisions, it's incontrovertible, that they are for sure that they've made the choice that they want and they're going to move ahead with this change. Well, if there's any possibility that this individual, the youth, could later regret having given consent, and the provider at the time where they're seeking consent, again from a minor who in general can't give consent without parental permission, is that would be part of the malpractice action. But in addition, there's an additional protection on this. Line 671, the individual had to suffer a permanent physical injury to prove malpractice. So there are safeguards to this malpractice standard. And to the senator's question, and I have great respect for the two primary individuals from Equality Utah that I've worked with. And my conversations with them and these individuals, I can't explain the intent that I've had with them and with every one of these individuals to try to do justice to this. But I knew as I sent this bill to the House, as I've said over and over again, that they would have their way with this. And they did. And they sent it back to us. And I asked my friends and my professional associates at Equality Utah, this is where we're at yesterday. What can you do that would ameliorate this, that I can give you something back? If you want this changed, what can you give me? And I was extremely impressed, Mr. President, with the fact that they admitted honestly and with integrity that they can't give me anything with this. What that means to this body and what that means to the legislature as a whole is there is highly likely to be a lawsuit, which my former questioning on this floor reflected that possibility. As I said at that time, and I'll say it again, is there's not a bill that we pass that can't be litigated. And I was really impressed with the fact that vain promises were not offered to me to avoid lawsuits. And that's integrity, which is the currency of the Capitol. It should be the currency of the Capitol. I've learned that years ago from one of my senior colleagues. And I appreciate that integrity because I know that there are cases where people will make vain promises and then file a lawsuit anyways after we've tried to accommodate. So to the senator's question, if this is offensive and irritating and legally complicated for those providers in this space, I respect that and I understand it. And the legislature as a whole is doing this, but I've tried along with others to do my best in this area. And this, I'm almost, well, I would bet every dollar that I have in my bank account right now that this will be litigated. And at this point, it is going to be, and we'll have to allow additional steps in our societal process to make determinations as to where this will go. So if people are concerned, and I respect that concern, then there's going to be further action on this. And I'll also say publicly, this is more for summation than otherwise, but I'm committed to doing my best in this area. And I'm afraid I'm going to be Senator Vickers in the marijuana area. He's always working on cannabis. And I'm afraid that I'm going to be working on this for the rest of my political life. But I'm happy to partner with honest, professional people to try to do justice to this community because I have a great respect for them and want nothing but the best for the children in all of our state.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Senator?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just one maybe semi-technical question, because the perspective of the senator is very unique. He's not only a practicing medical provider, but also he's also an attorney, which is unique. He's probably the only one in our entire body, legislature. Is it in your vision of how this rolls for implementation, that if someone interrupts care of a current patient to do a shift on the treatment, do you foresee that being impacted by the bill? So let's say you are already under treatment, but because of the medical situation, you may have to switch the type of treatment you're getting. Is it the intent of the legislation to stop that ability for that treatment to shift? Or is it because they're already under the umbrella of being in treatment currently that will not be impacted?
Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. President, for that question, and absolutely not. This should not interrupt anybody's current process that they are embarking upon or have continued on. The intent of the legislation, and I believe the changes the House made, do not change the relationships that the professionals and these youth receiving these treatments will be able to continue with.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Escamilla. Any further discussion on the motion to concur? Seeing none, I'm going to go back to Senator Kennedy. Any summation?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm very grateful for the input of the legislature as a whole. A lot of this has been done alone, but a lot of this has been done with great input from a variety of other people. And I don't care what side of the aisle, a lot of very good people have contributed. And at the base of this is an intent to try to do our best to the children in our state. And I respect the fact that this is not a perfect piece of legislation. We are imperfect people, and this process, as a result, is an imperfect process. But I'm committed for the rest of my political as well as personal life to doing justice in this area, and whatever I can do to help, I'm going to continue to work in this space. So, Mr. President, I move that we concur with the House amendments, and that's my summation.
Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and place the motion. Those in favor of the motion to concur say aye. Any opposed? I'm going to rule that motion passes. Fourth substitute Senate Bill 16 has been read 3 times. The question is, shall it pass? Roll call vote.
Senators Anderegg, Lewin, Bramble, Buxton, Cullimore, Escamilla.
Senator Escamilla.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I can explain my vote. Due to the nature of just this restriction and what we've been through the process, and this is just an opportunity to let the children and the parents and loved ones, because we've received so many emails, texts, and phone calls of parents more specifically. Excuse me. Just begging for their families and their children. Many of them are children that I know for years. And I would go to school with my kids and go to church with us. That we see you and we love your beautiful children. And we will continue to work. It's a commitment of the Senate Democrats to work for good public policy and try to mitigate impact into their lives. And this is just the beginning of a process, and that we will continue to do our job as legislators. And one of those is to listen to them and that they're not invisible. And my vote is no.
Senator Fillmore, Grover, Harper, Hinkins, Ibsen, Johnson, Kennedy, Kwan, McKay, McKell, Milner, Owens, Pitcher, Plum.
Senator Plum.
Mr. President, may I explain my vote?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Well, I was holding it together well until Luz's mama tears came. I just wanted to express my gratitude to the sponsor for what feels like the heart of wanting to do this well, as also to this body, because my experience in this with you all has been something I've really learned from. I'm going to go forward with the thing I have loved about being a pediatrician in Utah, and that is that we love kids. We have extra car seats and boosters in our car in case somebody needs a ride, right? And we celebrate when someone's kiddo gets a mission call or a marriage proposal or a college acceptance. And I'm going to go forward with that, with the hope that all of our kids and all of our families feel that. And I'm going to cling to that because I know it's possible. I do have concerns, and I do also share the heart of the families and the kiddos who have reached out. And boy, if I wasn't going to keep it together, Luz, you cut loose the dam. But I am really appreciative to all of you for the process that you have engaged in this body, and look forward to working. You won't be alone, Dr. Kennedy. I'll be alongside with you on that new path. And with that, I vote no.
Thank you, Senator Plum.
Senator Reby.
Senator Reby.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to briefly say to all the people who have reached out to me this week and last week that it's a unique place to be a safe space, and to know that you have a friend up here and an ally and someone to talk to and share your thoughts and concerns. And it's been really surprising to walk the halls and have people stop and tell you thank you, or their story, or their family's story. And so I really appreciate Senator Kennedy's lifelong commitment to this, because it is a confusing commitment. And it's hard for me as a legislator when they ask me specific questions to say, I don't know, and I don't know why this legislation isn't clearer, or where that leaves you, or where that's going to send you. So I think part of our responsibility is here to provide clarity instead of questions. And a lot of these families are now having more questions. So thank you for your commitment to doing the best you can. And for anybody listening, if you need someone to speak to or someone to share your story with, we are here to listen. And I'm a no.
Senator Sandel. Stevenson. Thatcher. Vickers. Weiler. Wilson. Winterton. President Adams.
Let's go back to
Senator Weiler.
Senator Weiler.
President Adams.
Aye. Fourth substitute, Senate Bill 16, having received 20 yea votes, 8 nay votes, 1 being absent, passes this body and will be returned to the House for the signature of the Speaker. We have a number of bills on the consent calendar. However, the 3 days has not transpired. So we're going to go to the third reading calendar. The first, anybody want to uncircle on third?